Hi, and welcome to another week. So, what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about our class for a couple of minutes and talk about how our class is actually divided up into three groups. Atypically low, representing the kind of bottom 20% of the students. And if you've been doing your DIBELS measures, then you'll be able to identify those students by the fact that they score below those kind of cut points on the DIBELS assessment measures. Then you have your kind of typical students, which is kind of your 25th percentile and up. And then you have your high performing students, which is your kind of either 75th or 80th percentile and above. And the reason it's really important to think about these students is because these three different groups need different amounts of time or different amounts of teacher time spent with them. In summary, lower students need a lot more time spent with them, and high students need very little teacher instructional time spent with them. And the data for this comes out of a fantastic study by Connor and her group down at the Florida Research Center. And what they were really interested in looking at were in a bunch of different studies were a whole bunch of different interventions and variables that kind of predicted what were the outcomes of grade 3 students on reading comprehension measures. And what they found in general is that, so CME is child managed explicit instruction. So that's basically when the student is looking at after their own learning, and teacher manage explicit instruction, which is when the teachers, helping out, giving like direct instruction or direct feedback. And what they did is they went to a whole bunch of schools and they put cameras up in these schools and they measured for the year what was going on in these classes. And at the beginning of the year, they gave a bunch of tests. And at the end of the year, they gave a bunch of tests. And then they had some poor person go through and basically look at every single student in every single class and code each day how much time did the teacher actually spend with them when it came to reading, and how much time did they spend doing it alone. And in general, what was found was for students who are that kind of the upper group, the atypically high, as represented by this line, is time by themselves doesn't really make that much of an impact on their reading comprehension scores. More time that the students are spending doing that really doesn't impact their scores at the end of the year. So if on average each day they spent 4 minutes, or on average each day they spent 6 minutes looking at reading comprehension on their own, didn't matter that much. And teacher intervention really also didn't matter that much. If the students got only 16 minutes of the day for those top students versus 20 minutes a day of teacher direct instruction, that really didn't make much difference. However, we'll show in a couple of minutes, it does if you kind of break this group down a little bit more. The second group, which is kind of your typical students, right kind of around the middle range, what they were found, and they are the longer dashes here, they found is with more time on average, when students were given more time to read on their own, their reading comprehension didn't improve as well. So as it's shown here, is they did well. They improved with more time provided by the teacher. However, in contrast, those lower students, they really did not do well when they had a lot of time on their own, and they really did well when the teacher gave them a lot of instruction. So we know that teachers are important, especially for our low students and also for our high students, are typically developing. So atypically low and typical developing students need a teacher to be present and instructing them, whereas those kind of higher students don't need us as much. In fact, we can go a step further. So this is looking at the change in reading comprehension scores between the beginning of the school year and the end of the school year. And when we look at typically developing students, at the beginning of the year, they start in the same place. However, when they got more teacher intervention, their scores went up. And when they got, so this is at the 20th percentile. So these are students who kind of were at the border of that at risk. So when they got teacher intervention, they did really well. And when they got just left on their own, they did not progress that much. So teachers for those lower students is very, very important as they go along. Now this is looking at the top group, so when they hit the 70th percentile, so just before they go into the really high group, what they found is there was really no change in teacher instruction versus students reading them by themselves. So that top group doesn't really respond that much, not that big of difference to teacher-led versus student-led. And the very top group, this is the top 90%, this is probably the top student in your class, what they found was actually the reverse. So this is student-led time, and this is teacher-led time. So actually, the teacher was a hindrance on the students' learning. So more teacher instruction time actually brought down the reading comprehension scores versus those who were left to read to their own. So actually, maybe you can think of your classroom as having 4 distinct groups. One being the very top student in your class who you really don't need to pay that much attention to. Then you have your typically high students, your top 20%, and those students you're going to spend some time with. Then you have your typically developing students who need kind of your average amount of time, and then you have your low students who need more than your average time. And the other thing is, when it comes to reading, during the day, reduce the amount of independent reading that students are doing. More time that you are facilitating reading, working in small groups with the students and providing them direct feedback on their reading aloud to them, more of that's going on, better that's going to boost their skills than simply having students read by themselves. And actually, there's a lot of research in the National Research Council that talks about the fact that silent reading or drop everything and read or sustained silent reading, those types of reading activities do not promote literacy development, especially with our bottom 20%. And even in our typical students, it doesn't really boast that much development. When you are already a proficient reader, that's great to be able to read, but it doesn't build up basic decoding skills. So when we're thinking of the basics, so this is text structure and this is language structure. When we're thinking basic text structure skills, reading to myself or reading by myself does not build up those skills. We need a teacher to be present. So this week, we're going to be thinking about those kind of typical students and our lower students. And again, the DIBELS can help us identify those. For all students, we're going to be working on one new vocabulary activity. But for our lower students, and our typical students, we want to go back and keep reinforcing our phonics, our letter sound correspondence, and our ability to blend words together. Because again, until those skills are really well consolidated, then they require a lot of working memory, a lot of cognitive load to do those skills. And because it takes a lot of cognitive load when these skills aren't consolidated, then it's very hard to develop fluency, text structure, and reading comprehension. So we want to keep bashing away, keep reinforcing those letter sound correspondence skills. And so I've given 2 different groupings of activity. One looking at the actual letter sound, and the second one looking at the blending. Please try these out, because I'm really interested in getting your feedback about how these different activities work within your classroom this next week when we connect. Thanks very much.